Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Next Door NetAdmin. Last week, I talked a little bit about proxy DHCP and why this is a good thing that can allow you to add PXE services to an existing DHCP server. I also mentioned that this was something that I had needed to set up, but that I didn't have in a condition sufficient to demonstrate to you yet. I'm going to demonstrate it today. If you haven't watched my previous video about setting up WinPE as a PXE boot, that's okay. If you do, just know that all of the boot files for Windows are set up exactly the same way. This is only a difference in the server side of the architecture, so that you're going to be using a Linux virtual machine essentially instead of TFTP 32 in a Windows environment. Works differently because it's a different set of infrastructure, but the effects will be the same, and the files that will be loading on the client side are the same. So this isn't a complete replacement for that, just an update. Let's get started, shall we? I have created just a completely standard Ubuntu 24.04.1 LTS Linux virtual machine. As you can see here, I'm running as the user PXE admin. PXE demo is the name of the machine. Cool. I haven't installed anything additional yet. This is purely stock, just off of the installer ISO. What I'm going to do is begin by installing the software that I'm going to use for this. And in this case, I'm going to be using DNSMasq. Okay, yeah, we're going to install that. Wonderful. Okay. Now, if we go and check our DNSMasq status, you'll notice that it says it's failed. That is, to some extent, anticipated here. Failed to create listening socket for port 53 address already in use. Yes, DNSMasq is going to use port 53, but systemd already has a network resolver running at port 53. And so you won't be able to launch DNSMasq out of the box. That's okay. For this configuration, we're going to configure DNSMasq to not do DNS at all. We don't need it to. All we want is for it to do proxy DHCP, not even standard DHC, proxy DHCP. And additionally, it has some functionality for basic TFTP to enable PXE Boot. That's what we're going to be configuring. If we go to etc dnsmasq.d, this is where we're going to be putting in our configuration files. Right now, there's nothing there. There's a README file, excuse me, but there's no configuration files there. What we are going to do is create 3 configuration files. You could put this all in one. I've split it into 3 just so that you can enable or disable sections of the configuration as needed to do what you want. So let's start by creating a configuration to, oh yeah, because of course it's not writable. I am not currently root. I am going to cheat and just turn myself into root for the duration of this session. Standard disclaimer applies. It's better to use sudo anytime you need root, but I'm just going to cheat because I'm going to create several of these files right off the bat. Okay, so the only command that you're really going to need here, and I'm just going to comment this so that it's easy to see exactly what this does. This disables DNS function. Port equals 0. It's literally all you need to turn off DNS entirely. With this, it's done. It's not going to do anything further. Next one I want to configure is proxyDHCP itself. All right, so in proxyDHCP, I'm going to set log-DHCP, or I would if I could spell correctly. There we go, log-DHCP. Log-DHCP tells DNSMasq to log DHCP transactions because this is useful for troubleshooting if we want to actually dig into this at any point. Next is DHCP-range equals, I'm going to give it the IP address of this server. In this case, it's 192.168.17.26, comma, proxy. We're not putting in a DHCP range. We're not putting in any sort of options. We are telling it that this is a proxy subnet. If you had additional subnets that you wanted to provide service on, you could do that quite simply with, 192.168.23. Whatever. It doesn't actually need to be an IP address on this machine. But ideally it would be. But you have that, and you can tell it that that's a proxy subnet as well. If it's not the actual IP address that the DHCP packet is coming in on, I would put the router address or the DHCP relay agent that is proxying the request to the DNSMasq server. But I only need one DHCP range in this case. And then the last part I'm going to put in is DHCP-no-override. What is this? DHCP-no-override controls DNSMasq's behavior with some TFTP specific fields. Normally, there are fields dedicated in the DHCP protocol for next server, boot file name, etc. These can be moved out of those dedicated spots and into the list of generic DHCP options. Technically, that should work. And that's what DNSMasq tries to do out of the box. It tries to take those fields out of their dedicated spot in the header and put them into the options list. Again, it should work, but some broken clients aren't looking for the TFTP options in the list of DHCP options, even though it should technically work. They're only looking for it in the header of the DHCP packet. Normally, we would move these options out of the header and into the options field so that we have more room for total options, rather than having to take up dedicated space in the header. But because this is a proxy DHCP implementation, I'm not putting in a boatload of other options. Any non-TFTP options are going to come from my DHCP server, the primary one. These only need to have the TFTP options available. So I'm using DHCP no override to tell DNSMasq, go back to the old behavior and use the dedicated fields in the DHCP packet header. In case I have some old clients, in case I have some broken clients that are using old behavior, just use the default, simple, safe way of handling this. Cool. And that's all I'm going to put in the proxy DHCP configuration file. Last one I'm going to create will be PXE Boot. PXE Boot has all your commands to enable TFTP, so we're actually going to start with enable-TFTP. Wonderful. TFTP-root. This tells DNSMasq which directory on your Linux machine to serve TFTP from. So this is where your boot files will need to go. I haven't created it yet, but I would usually put that at srv serve TFTP boot. Cool. Easy. And the last thing I'll mention is PXE-service equals, here's where it gets fun, capital x86-64 underscore capital EFI. 64-bit clients using EFI boot. Cool. And I'll just call this WinPE UEFI PXE. Cool. And then the boot file name I'm going to need, if you remember from my previous video, we had a dedicated boot directory, and then we did boot mgfw.efi. That's what you need. Enable TFTP, TFTP root, tell it where it is, and then tell it PXE service for this type of client. The WinPE UEFI PXE is what you would call it on a menu. You can set up a menu and tell it to boot one of several different PXE boot files. I'm not, because I only have one that I want it to boot, but it has that capability built in. And then you give it the actual path to the boot file that you're going to be loading. Cool. That's the end of that. What I need to do now is change into SRV. And if I list everything, there's no directories there. If I try to start DNSMasq right now, it'll fail because it doesn't have a directory for it to actually read for TFTP. So we need to go and create the TFTP boot directory. And if you will excuse me for just 1 second, I need to double check my permissions. All right, I've double checked my permissions to make sure I'm giving you the right instructions here. I am currently running as root. I shouldn't be running as root, but I am running as root. However, just to make sure that this is set up correctly, I'm going to change ownership on this to PXE admin so that it's owned correctly. And we've got permissions of 755. That is exactly what we want for the TFTP boot directory. That is sufficient. Cool. Now, that is sufficient to enable proxyDHCP, yes. And you can put all your WinPE boot files for PXE boot into that directory. How? Well, I mean, if you're familiar with SFTP or SCP, you can use SFTP to put the files in there, and that would work fine. If you're accessing this from a Windows system, however, it might also be useful to have SMB file sharing available. And when you're booting into PXE, maybe you want to have it access an SMB file share somewhere. It might be on another server. It might be on this server if you've got a self-contained PXE imaging server. So I'm going to show you how to set up SMB because it might be more convenient for you to access it to store your Windows PE files, but it also might be convenient to have it there in case you want to use another deployment share for PXE clients for other purposes. Because Windows PE built in doesn't have SFTP capabilities to speak of. It does have SMB natively, definitely. So the other component that I'm going to add here will be Samba. Well, I mean, if I put in install, it'll work better. There we go, install Samba. Samba has a bunch of stuff with it, but you just install that. Cool. And then there's a few things that I like to put in my Samba configuration. So, unlike DNSMasq, which has a configuration directory that we can drop multiple configuration files into, for the most part, Samba's configuration is all in a single configuration file, to my knowledge. If Samba has the capability to read from configuration directories, and it probably does, I just don't know if it has it set up by default. Why don't we check that? etc Samba, What do we have in here? Just an smb.conf, no conf.d. Oh well. So I'll just nano smb.conf. Cool. This has a lot of options in it. The options that I want to change is this very first one, work group. Call it what you will. Next door netadmin, perhaps. I can call it that. You might have something different. I feel like next door netadmin is too long anyway for a NetBEUI, NetBIOS compliant domain work group name. Yeah, too many things. I'll call it PXE Bootnet. Cool. I don't need to worry too much about this other stuff. Authentication, server role. Yes, all of this stuff. This last option, map to guest for bad user. I don't really want any anonymous connections to my Samba server in the first place. I'm just going to say map to guest, not none. Never is the correct syntax for that. If you're going to connect to this share via SMB, I want you to be authenticated. TFTP may be wide open, but then TFTP through DNSMasq is read-only. So if you're going to write to it through SMB, I want you to be authenticated. Scrolling down the rest of the way, under the miscellaneous section, there's a couple of other options that are good to add for compatibility with recent versions of Windows. The server min protocol, SMB3. SMB2 is also a suitable selection from the perspective of security. But a lot of recent Windows versions really want to see SMB3. And if you're connecting from Windows PE, you want to be on the most recent thing that it supports, because it may or may not have support for the older versions. It definitely won't have support for SMB1. Don't use SMB1 for anything these days. Disable it everywhere you can. And the other thing I want to do is encrypt passwords equals true. This is also important because SMB3 is half the story. Encrypting passwords is the other half. If the server's not doing password encryption within SMB, Windows will complain about it, and in some cases will not talk to it at all. So it's important to have that. Once that's done, we can go all the way to the bottom. It has a couple of default shares like printers. I'll just add semicolons to comment that all out. Same thing with an administrative print share directory. I'm not going to do that either because Windows clients look for this as a source of downloadable printer drivers. That's fine. I'm not sharing printers off this. I don't care. But I will add a new share for TFTP boot. PXE boot files. That's just a comment. Path equals /srv/tftp boot. Browsable. You can do yes or no. I've talked about this in a previous video. Having a hidden server share doesn't really add a lot of security in my mind because you can still get to it if you know the path. So browsable equals yes, that's fine. Guessed okay. No, I said I wanted to make sure that everybody was authenticated if they're connecting over SMB. Read only. No, that would kind of defeat the purpose of using SMB to manage our TFTP share. Create mask equals 0755. Yes. So in a Linux /Unix /BSD environment, I want it to default to owner, full control, read execute for group, read execute for world. Cool. That's everything that you would need to set that up. But one last thing that you would need to do, you have a user. Your user in this case is PXE admin. In my demo environment, the user is PXE admin. Cool. That's the user that I'm going to want to connect to my SMB share with. But Samba does not necessarily talk to PAM, which is the subsystem in Linux that is managing your passwords. So you can try to authenticate with the username. It may or may not actually work. In fact, it probably won't. So to make this work properly, SMB password, I'm going to append to the list of valid SMB passwords a password for PXE admin. Now, this is sudo requesting the password. There we go. Now, new SMB password. This can be different from what you have to log into the server. There you go. Now you have a valid SMB account for your user and the password to go with it. Wonderful. So, at this point, you should be able to start DNSMasq. Except I'm supposed to use sudo for that, and I didn't. Haha. Sudo system control start DNSMasq. Cool. So why did that not work? Then this is the troubleshooting part that you always end up looking at. Well, but I didn't give you that. Oh, invalid argument at this point. Okay. Let me guess. Yeah. When I was cheating and switching into root, I created all the configuration files that I wanted in root's home directory instead of in my DNSMasq configuration directory. If you're going to cheat, be sure you cheat well. Because if you cheat incompetently, things will blow up in your face. Oh, dear. All right, move. I want to move that into etc DNSMasq.d. Yeah. And I want to move both of those to etc DNSMasq.d. All right. Now DNSMasq starts correctly because I have fixed it properly. All righty. And so you see there it's DHC proxy. TFTP root is there. And it's not even going to bother with trying to open DNS on port 53 because that's been disabled. Now, the Samba server is probably already running. Yes, it is, but it's loaded, but it's inactive. Code exited. That's fine. That's probably because it wasn't fully configured. So at this point, I am going to start Samba. There we go. Ah ha 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 ha. I'm checking the wrong service. That is the Samba Active Directory daemon. Not actually the Samba daemon that I want. All right. Well, what is it then? Is it just SMB? Yep, there it is. The Samba SMB daemon is what we want. That is running. It will not have been reloaded yet to actually get our updated configuration that we created. So let's see if reload is available. There we go, it reloaded. So now it'll have the required configuration necessary. And actually, I don't know. Yeah, no, that'll work. That'll work. Because it did a kill hang up so that it could reload correctly. Excellent. Cool. All right, then. So at this point, you would have a running DNSMasq server doing proxyDHCP for your network, and you would have it doing TFTP as well. And then you also have Samba running in a valid configuration so that you can access your TFTP boot share in order to copy over your Windows PE files or create other shares or create other users. In an environment where you're actively using SMB shares on the machine, you may find it useful to create another user account specifically to have read-only access to the share. That's up to you. But yeah, this is the way that you can string it in. I have actually tested it this time with hardware and with software. It works exactly the same as in the previous video that I demonstrated, so I'm not going to demonstrate it to you again. If this has been helpful to you or useful in any way, I'm glad that it has been. That's kind of the goal. If you have suggestions on additional things that could be done to make the setup better, or if you have suggestions on other things that you would like to hear me talk about or demonstrate, feel free to let me know down in the comments section. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching. I am your next door NetAdmin, and we will see you next time.